Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Red Room. This is Heather Carlisle. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. The topic that I've chosen for our conversation tonight is forgiveness. Somebody's actually logging in. Brava. Thank you so much, Shawnee. So, forgiveness. Forgiveness is a hard topic. I've researched it over the years many times, and I do have a study guide or a handbook on forgiveness. And Jack has done you a favor. He has attached my mini forgiveness guide, which is 13 pages long, to an email that he's sending to you. So if you got the invitation for the Red Room this evening, you will receive the email with my 13-page mini forgiveness guide. My full-length one has a lot more of my writing and philosophical conversation in it. The mini guide is kind of a form to help walk you through the stages, to tell you about the stages of forgiveness, and a questionnaire that you can use to help you assess your readiness to forgive. So I'm looking very much forward to our conversation this evening, and if you have something that has been difficult for you to forgive, or someone whom you know, I'm most interested in hearing that, and hopefully I can shed some light on it or help you think about it more deeply or in closure. And sometimes it's a very difficult topic. So I wanted to bring it up this evening because various times people come to me with a difficulty that they feel is almost impossible to forgive. And I believe that there is a way for us to do that. And more than anything, forgiveness really is for us. Because holding on to unforgiveness or resentment or feelings of anger or wanting to get revenge, some way of holding on to an unforgiveness. There's an old adage, and you may have heard it, that says planning a revenge or holding resentment is like going to the drugstore to buy poison for somebody and then going home and taking it yourself because you're holding on to something negative inside you. Just going to adjust this a little bit. There we go. So any questions that you have, I'm excited for you to share them with me. Meanwhile, I'm going to talk about the 5 stages of forgiveness. So, well, no, I think before I do that, I'm going to go through these 2 different categories of the distinction between, where is it over here? It's right in the beginning of the mini guide that you received. What the distinction between what forgiveness is and what forgiveness is not. So, what forgiveness is, it is moral and it is respectful to you and to other parties. It is a response to an injustice or an injury or a moral wrong. It is the virtue internally for you of forbearance or turning to the good in the face of a wrongdoing. It is goodwill given unconditionally. It may sometimes be letting someone back into your heart. It may be tolerance or merciful restraint from pursuing resentment or revenge. In essence, choosing to let go of the anger, but not necessarily choosing to condone the behavior. Generosity, it is, or offering good things such as attention, time, remembrances on holidays. It is moral love or contributing to the betterment of the other person. Forgiveness is paradoxical, such as returning good for evil, a spiritual learning experience. Forgiveness is the foregoing of resentment or of revenge when the wrongdoer's actions created a disrespect or an injury, and the giving of the gifts of mercy or absolution. Forgiveness is offering generosity and kindness when the wrongdoer has not earned them. As we give the gift of forgiveness, we ourselves are healed or given peace. Forgiveness is beyond duty and beyond responsibility, going into being merciful and charitable. Forgiveness is a freely chosen gift rather than a grim obligation. Forgiveness is the overcoming of wrongdoing with good. Forgiveness is choosing not to find harm in a person's action, not holding it against them, him or her. And then what forgiveness is not. Forgiveness is not repression, forgetting or denying. If I didn't notice it, maybe it will go away. That's not forgiveness. Forgiveness is not avoidance, hoping the injury will vanish with time passing. Forgiveness is not ignoring the effects of the wrongdoing as if it never happened. Forgiveness is not minimizing. When people say, well, nothing that bad happened, that's not forgiveness. Forgiveness does not rebuild trust. You can forgive, but trust has to be rebuilt as well. Forgiveness is not making excuses. The person did this because it wasn't really their responsibility, because it was only this one time. It won't happen again. Such excuses. Forgiveness is not corruption. Condoning something which is dishonorable, not appropriate nor tolerable, and allowing that which is insincere, untrustworthy, dishonest, controlling, irresponsible, arrogant, tyrannical, bullying, aggressive, disrespectful, and hateful. It is not condoning those things. Forgiveness is not condemning. It's not blaming, scorning, insulting, whining, nor manipulating. Forgiveness is not punishing. She or he deserves to know they have wronged me. It's not that. Forgiveness is not righteousness, forgiving with a sense of moral self-righteousness. Forgiveness is not getting even, seeking justice, restitution, or compensation. That's seeking justice, restitution, or compensation. That's not forgiveness. Forgiveness is not making a deal. Forgiveness is not a tit for tat or a quid pro quo deal. It doesn't demand fairness nor compensation first. Forgiveness doesn't release the offender from responsibility. And there is an important distinction between forgiveness and reconciliation. Forgiveness is one person's moral response to another's injustice. If someone did you injury or harm or treated you unfairly or unjustly, if you can let it go and let it be and not keep holding on and festering with it, that's you forgiving. Now, reconciliation is two parties coming together in mutual respect. So one of us can forgive, perhaps the other one does, perhaps not. Perhaps the other one apologizes, perhaps not. But we always have control over whether or not we forgive and let it go. Reconciliation is when you want to reconnect with the person who did the injury or the harm, and that person comes back to connect with you as well. So, very important distinction. I wonder if you have any questions about that. There's a common thing that when some people haven't thought deeply about forgiveness, it's easy to hang on to your resentment or a sense of needing to have restitution or of not being willing to forgive and let it go because we have a common misunderstanding that to forgive means that you wipe the slate clean and that you now let that person back into your life, or you re-enter that interaction or relationship or situation just the way it was before. And that's not the case. Because if an injury has been delivered, if you have been injured or harmed or disrespected or treated unfairly in some way, that person has now lost your trust around that. And forgiving them, you let it go and you don't hold anything against them anymore, doesn't mean that your trust has been rebuilt. Doesn't mean that you're going to be any safer with that person. Doesn't mean that they have changed at all. And depending on what the injustice or the injury was, you're going to need to make the decision. Do I reconnect with this person? Do I let this person back into my life? Do I have a relationship at all with this person? Do I ever speak to this person? That's up to you because of the nature of the injury. You don't have to reconcile. You don't have to go back to the way it was in the beginning. Forgiveness is just you letting it go and holding no longer any need for restitution or revenge or apology from them. You have forgiven it and released it, which means you find within yourself peace with it. Does that make sense, everyone? Is that clearer? Because some people are afraid to forgive because they think forgiving someone makes them vulnerable then to be hurt all over again. And that's not forgiveness. It's kind of naive, actually. And so, but we do need to forgive so that we can let go of whatever it is that's troubling us about being harmed or injured or treated unfairly. So I wanted to share with you the 5 stages of forgiveness. Stage 1 is acknowledgement, uncovering the injury. And if you look at, this is the 13-page mini forgiveness study guide that Jack emailed to you that you can print if you want to. There's acknowledgement or uncovering the injury. That's the first. There's stage 2, which is desire and decision, being ready to forgive. And there's an assessment here for you to take to help you decide what your state of readiness is. Stage 3 is inner and outer action, which is offering the forgiveness. Stage 4 is surrender and release, which is letting it go. And stage 5 is understanding and acceptance, which is now you've accepted the release and you are able to now look ahead into the future. And so if you can see, this forgiveness guide is a kind of handbook so that you can walk through it and do your writing, do your thinking, and your own questioning around whatever it is that you need to forgive. Oftentimes you're not going to need something like this unless it's something that's very deeply disturbing. I've got a question. What if you can't forgive because of rage? Well, rage is a very strong anger. And anger is the experience of wanting to defend ourselves. And it's, in essence, a very loudly phrased no. And so if we're saying no, there's something here that is an injustice, and maybe you can't get a justice. You can't achieve a justice with this situation. Or there's not going to be a resolution of the difficulty, or something that's changed so that this will never happen again. So let me know, dear, what the, if you can, you don't have to, but if you can, let me know what the rage is about. I have a wonderful story to share with you that is related to a high level of handling outrage, rage, anger, and needing to do something with a great injury and a great injustice. And it comes from, when you see me glance over there, I'm looking at the text. That's what I'm doing. When I was in high school, there were four of us. There were Judy, Eileen, Sandy, and Heather. And so I'm still, in some ways, I connect with these other three women and love them. But, we live very distant from each other. My girlfriend Sandra still lives in my home province of Saskatchewan. Her story, parts of her story, I'm sure she wouldn't mind me sharing, and as a matter of fact, I think she would like it. So I'm dedicating this evening's study of forgiveness to my girlfriend Sandra. She and her husband Ed always wanted a family, and they had two daughters. And when their daughters were quite young, one of Sandra's cousins and her cousin's husband were killed in a car accident by a drunk driver. And Sandra and Ed decided that they would adopt the four children that were left orphans. So Sandra and Ed raised 6 children. That's quite a commitment. I was, and I always will be, so proud of them for doing that. And of course, they have this wonderful family, and now they're having grandchildren. And then later on, when her children were grown, her mother and father, Sandra's mother and father, and her mother was our 5th and 6th grade school teacher, they were both killed by a drunk driver. Much before their time. They never got to meet their great-grandchildren. And then, only a year ago, Sandra and Ed's oldest daughter, she and her husband were killed by a drunk driver, leaving 5 children, young children, up to the age of 11. And that means that we now have 5 more children orphaned by a car accident with a drunk driver. So how do Sandra and Ed handle this? When people over and over have been murdered, killed because of drinking. Such irresponsibility. How do you get past the anguish and the rage about such stupidity, stupid loss of life? I'm not sure. There's no way I can know that, nor can any of us, because that's not our journey. But Sandra and her younger daughter are now raising those 5 orphaned children. And Sandra is doing something else. She's taking her rage, her anger, her anguish, and little by little, she's not punishing the boy who was drunk and murdered her 2 children, killed her 2 children. He is being brought to justice in the court. But she is talking about changing the laws regarding drunk driving and how that works, so that it's taken more seriously that people who drink too much don't get behind the wheel of a car. So that's a story about how does one continue to live with that kind of tragedy and injury without poisoning themselves with rage, with anguish, with anger, resentment, revenge, all of those deep feelings. I think about it in 3 levels. So the first level includes what this person typed, rage. And that's what I call, there are three human brains, and you've heard me teach this before. The brainstem, the old brain, is what connects to the base of the skull, down the spinal column to the belly. And that's the reptile brain, or the instinctual gut instinct brain. And that's the place where anger lies, because anger is a defense. That's where we go into fight, flight, or freeze to survive. So sometimes when we've been threatened, or we've been injured or harmed in some way, immediately we go into defense mode and say no and do whatever we can to control the situation or the people to keep ourselves safe. And that's where anger is. Anger really isn't very intelligent, and it isn't empathetic. Now, what Sandra is doing, she's not living in rage, but she does have outrage. Outrage is intelligent and empathetic, and it's focused on solving a problem, so that we wield that intensity of feeling with intelligence to make something happen, to reach some kind of solution. It's pure power. But if we're in rage or if we're in anger, it's pure power without intelligence and without empathy, without head and without heart. So that's power and control. Then if we go to the next level, the next brain, that's the mammalian brain, or the emotional brain. And that's where we have feelings. And we may have guilty feelings about doing something wrong, or about maybe did I participate in this injury in some way, or resentment of a sort where we're pointing the finger of blame at somebody else. Oh, we're afraid. We're afraid sometimes to forgive and let go because we're afraid that the injury might come again. And so in that case, we're stuck in the worry of either being harmed or in the planning of revenge. And those are emotional responses. So, and what we want to do there is grieve the loss so that we can let go of the feelings. We get the catharsis through the grief. And then what we want to do is want to go to the human brain, or a level of intelligence where it's an internal response, and we ask ourselves what we want to do. And that's the place where we come to a readiness to forgive. And I'm sure I haven't talked at depth about this with Sandra, but in essence, she and Ed are in a place of what do we want? What are we going to do? And how are we going to do it? And I know she's working to figure out how to and what to do in terms of changing the laws. And little by little, she's doing talks and reaching people who have the ability to do something about that. So what we want to do is use that great passion of outrage as a power not to get revenge, not to do punishment, not to cripple ourselves with being lost in emotions. And we do need to grieve. But then to come forward and to say, what am I going to do? What do I want to achieve? And who do I want to be in this situation? It's connected really with one of the great examples of outrage, which is Mothers Against Drivers. MAD. Women angry at their children or their loved ones being killed and creating a nationally famous organization to say, we don't want to tolerate this anymore. Which means, in a certain way, many of those people, I'm sure, have forgiven the people who are driving the cars. But they're not going to tolerate it happening more to kill more people. So, dear ones, the person who said, what if you can't forgive because of rage? Can you tell me the kind of rage, the kind of anger, what kinds of thoughts run through your mind about this situation and that fuel your anger so that you can't let go of the rage? And if you'd share that with me, I'd love to have a conversation with you about that. Thank you so much. So when we look at the stages of forgiveness, and thank you for listening to that story about Sandra. The first thing, if you have the work to do around forgiveness, and it's not just a process that you can go through in a day or two, then what you want to do is a narrative of slights, hurts, grievances, or betrayals. So sometimes when there is something that has been an injury or a harm done to you by another person, it may be that this is part of a pattern. And what you want to do is get very clear about that pattern, because at this point your trust has been betrayed, and you want to get very clear, what is it that's happened, so that I can forgive but not condone, so that I can let it go and be discerning enough to prevent further harm. So let me just share this with you. From time to time in our relationships with others, something happens which is especially unpleasant and hurtful. For example, a friend, a coworker, boss, neighbor, or family member may make a hurtful mistake, may lie to you, criticize you unfairly, betray you, speak in anger or yell, or a romantic partner may jilt you or show undue attention towards someone else, or betray you in some other manner. You may experience rape, adultery, physical injury, abuse, rejection, broken trust, divorce, injustice, or slander. Such injuries may be the result of non-action, such as is the case when a friend or loved one fails to give attention, be accountable, or express affection. If you're ready to heal or resolve a grievance, concentrate on that person or that event. Don't decide that you're going to do a big global thing. You want to treat each one carefully. And when you do this, this is a reminder. Sometimes it's more difficult to forgive yourself and your part in it than the other person. Sometimes not. So what you want to do first is acknowledge your injury, which means it's validating yourself. So acknowledge your injury by describing the event or whatever it was that caused the injury or the harm. And you can talk about the relationship, the injury or the trauma that you experienced. You can calculate what you lost, what the costs were, what was taken from you or what was broken. And you can talk about or write about your interpretation of all this, why they did it to you, consider their beliefs, their generation, culture, gender, personality, their woundedness, their prejudice. And number 5, you can consider the emotions, how it made you feel, what it made you feel about different things or different people, and what it is that you need to feel to grieve or mourn. You can write about what changed, how what they did changed your relationship, your life, yourself, your situation. Usually that's a cost, isn't it? And your response. How did you respond? Did you grieve? Did you want to punish? Did you control? Did you want to please? Did you want to play passive or bully or whine or get defensive, judge, get revenge, take the blame, feel guilty? What was your response? And now think about, and there may be nothing here, but what was your responsibility? Your burden, how you need to forgive yourself, and what you need to forgive yourself for. And I caution you, do not take irrational guilt, and do not put yourself down for things that are not your responsibility. So be careful, be discerning with that. Yes, I want to take my part in something and do something about that, but it's not helpful and it's not healthy for me to take the full blame in something that wasn't in my power to control. That's stage one. So that's learning, exploring for yourself all around the injury or the betrayal or the harm that was done. And then stage two is you want to think about what's your readiness to forgive. Is this something you want? Are you ready to decide to do this? And the person who typed, what if you can't forgive because of rage? Or is it the other person's rage? If you're still in a place where you have rage and outrage, then you need some way to move into some different viewpoint or different emotional state so that you can become intelligent and manage yourself better than just being obsessed or possessed by your anger. And that can be a difficult thing. Sometimes, I know when I was severely betrayed many, many years ago, I knew that I had to grieve and I had to get out the anger, because the very first step, of course, of grieving, when you're hurt or when you've lost something or something has been broken, and my trust was broken in a profound way. The first step is you're in anger, like this person said, rage. And I knew I had a great therapist, and I knew that there was no way for me to jump past my anger and my rage, and that it had to get out. It has to come out. And when you have rage or outrage or anger, it needs to be expressed, and you've probably heard me say this before when I'm talking about emotional intelligence. It needs to be expressed in catharsis for yourself and by yourself. You don't want anybody in the presence of your anger or rage, because it's none of their business. It's for you to express, to experience how passionately you care, and so that you can get past the anger to the deeper feelings underneath. And what I chose to do, I swam laps at that point, and I took my rage and my anger and my screaming anguish to swimming. It's very effective if you use your large muscle groups where you walk, you run, and at that point I was doing laps. And so every time my hand came over and hit the water and my face was underwater, I screamed or I yelled a cuss word. Come up for air, and I'd scream. And I'd hit the water every time my arms came over. So that I exhausted myself for quite a long time, just letting it go in catharsis so that I could move to the next stage of dealing with the injury that I experienced. And of course, the next stage then was grieving the sadness, the loss, the betrayal. And at a certain point, drawing the boundary, drawing the line very clearly so that I wouldn't ever be harmed again in that way. And then walking away from it, letting it go completely. I can't say that I ever completely forgave the injury. Because I don't know that I don't know that I could ever be assured that it wouldn't happen again to me or someone else. But I let it go so that it was no longer my business. And so that was, in that situation, the manner in which I could forgive, so that it no longer was personal to me. Just as my girlfriend Sandra is living with all of these losses, I don't know how much she's been able to forgive, but she's let go the individual and focused her energy on making something happen, solving a problem. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? So this questionnaire about the desire and decision, being ready to forgive. I have a quote from Enright. Resisting the act of forgiving until the offender somehow changes is giving great power to the offender. And that's kind of at cross purposes, isn't it? You don't want to give power to your offender. You want to take all the juice out of that, take all the energy out of that, take all of the in essence, attitude of consequence for that, because it's no longer something you respect, and yet you can let it go. You can forgive. Does that make sense? We want you to forgive, we want you to let go, so that you don't carry the burden anymore, and that you have peace in your heart and your mind, and you can go about your life not hindered by that anymore. Wondering if any of you have an experience, or a friend, or a loved one, or someone whom you know that is having a hard time with an injustice or with forgiving. So there's an instrument here, questions to ask yourself about your readiness to forgive. And I'll just read a couple of them so you get a sense of it. Just thinking about what happened makes me fume. Right there. That person is still angry, probably not ready to forgive, needs to still grieve. The person who said, forgive because of, what if you can't forgive because of rage? Yes, it makes sense. Can't forgive me? Is that what you mean? That you can't forgive yourself? That one is an important thing, and that's in your control, dear. Another question. I don't think I can ever fully forgive the person in question. Just like I shared with the great injury that was done to me, the great betrayal that I experienced years ago. I let it go completely. I don't know that I completely forgave everything that was done to me because of how deep the betrayal was. But I could completely let it go. That makes sense? I understand why the person in question did what he or she did. I have revenge fantasies about the person in question. And so still, there's a connection there with wanting to place injury in return. When I think about what the person did to me, I no longer feel hurt. There you go. This person is ready. They're ready to let go because their emotional hurt is, they've now grieved it themselves, because nobody gets rid of that hurt but me in my process of the catharsis and the grief. I would not want it to happen again, but I have forgiven the person in question. So that person is already in forgiveness and probably is ready to completely let it go and put it behind. Okay, let's see. We've got another comment. No, you asked if anyone was in this place of non-forgiveness. So that you're in a place of non-forgiveness. And it takes your energy, doesn't it? And it dampens you down, and in essence, it muddies your internal system in your day and your life. Another person says, I'm having trouble with the term forgiveness. Forgiveness. I'm wondering if you were tuned in when I read what forgiveness is and what forgiveness is not. And forgiveness is, if I were to say quickly, well, let me read that. The small definition of forgiveness is one person's moral response to another's injustice. So the moral response usually means a loving or kind or virtuous response from honorable character. So when someone does an injustice or an injury or causes harm, we come back with honor and don't hold on to needing to get punishment or needing to get revenge or holding on to anger about it. We see what the person did, and hopefully, the easy ones at least, are when the person either apologizes or promises that they won't do it again, or they offer to make restitution, or they admit that they're at fault, or they want to make up for it in some manner, and you say, it's okay. I accept your apology, and in that way, I forgive you. Which means I give you back the moral response, which is from kindness or some kind of respect. Does that make sense about forgiving? I'm not holding on to anything. Let's see here. In my case, I was able to move on without forgiving. I'm not holding on to anything. There you go. So there was no need to forgive when you experienced some kind of harm or injury, because it didn't arouse a need for you to defend yourself against that or to grieve the injury that caused inside yourself. You were able to just walk past, let it go, and put behind you. That may be true. And then another person who does that also, they may let it go, walk past, put it behind them, but hold on to the resentment and or just brush it under the carpet. To the contrary, it was an extremely difficult injury, harm. So, event. So that tells me that you are probably very strong, very mature, philosophical, if not spiritual, and that you didn't take that on as a personal injury where you needed to grieve a deep loss and come out the other side trying to find a new sense of yourself or a new way of living. I'm not saying it was easy to move on. There you go. But you did. You let it go. And sometimes I think of, as I said before in my example, forgiving sometimes, the way of forgiving is letting it go, which means it's no longer of any consequence to me. And I've let it go. I've put it in the past. I don't need to have any more involvement with it because I have no attachment to that anymore. And sometimes I think strong, immature people can do that. And usually it comes from wisdom. Usually it comes from empathy or kindness, some kind of understanding, or moving through some kind of internal adjustment or restructuring of yourself. And I congratulate you that you got over something so difficult and that you, even through difficulty, moved on to the next part of your life. Couple more questions from the readiness to forgive. I would trust the person in question again. Then that says that the other person has apologized and you believe that they won't do it again. Now, when we have a pattern, like domestic violence, where whoever was violent comes back to their senses and apologizes and promises never to do it again, and yet the pattern recurs. And what we want to do is, yes, we can forgive the person because they apologize, and we want to do something to make sure that if they can't control their anger and their violence, that we remove ourselves and anyone who is vulnerable to that, or to make sure that they learn more emotional intelligence, go through therapy, better intervention program, or an anger management program, because you don't want to just let it happen over and over again. Another comment. I think sometimes in the past I have forgiven or let things go, but it usually came back later in life. Yes, and that means that, as I said earlier, when we've had an injury, a trust has been broken. And when it comes back, if you're discerning, you won't trust quite so far again, and you won't therefore be injured or allow anyone else to be injured, because you are now wise and sensitive to how far you can trust that situation or that person. We don't want you to for it to come back later in life. Another comment. My husband left me, and I am unable to feel anything. Not grieving, just numb. I am so sorry, dear. I would say that you are in the natural response to a severe loss, and that is the first stage of grief. So your husband left me, which means something has been lost and broken. Your marriage and all the secondary losses that go around a marriage life and a married relationship. If your husband left you, he took away many, many things and broke your trust in many ways. And that's significant. It takes probably 3 years of adjustment to really find yourself and your life again after something that significant. So on my website, there's quite an extensive page on grieving, and there's a checklist of about 20 items that say, you're grieving when. So you might want to look at that list. And if you want some more resources, I have a long email that I send out to people who have had a significant loss of the grief resources in the Dallas area. And there are some wonderful ones. But the very first stage of grief is what they call denial or emotional numbness or shock. And so I would say if you're not grieving, you're just numb, that would mean that you're in shock. And when we're in shock, we don't have an emotional response. Or in essence, it's been such a threat that our heart shuts down, and we're in a state of wanting to keep ourselves safe. And at that point, emotions are of no use whatsoever. We just want to be able to be very mentally clear and to be able to take care of business and to do the things that need to be done. So you won't feel anything for a while, and that's because you need to keep on keeping on. And you need to keep taking care of yourself and the things that are your responsibility. Over a period of time, you will begin to probably feel anger at the betrayal. And then the anger moves into all the other feelings of the pain, the anguish, the hurt, sadness, the fear, the anxiety, maybe some guilt, maybe some blame, um, deep feelings about all the things that you've lost and where you're at now. And moving through that grief can take some time of all those feelings. It's very draining, it's exhausting, it takes time out of your day, and you need to take care of yourself. And that's why I really recommend you go to the page on grief on my website, and you can also order my Grief Recovery Manual, which has 12 chapters in it from when I used to do grief recovery groups. So be patient and kind with yourself. And Jack is saying, oh, let's see here. Please put me on your email blast. Did not receive the mini forgiveness material, please. Well, dear, then let me give you Jack's email right now, and he'll send it directly to you, dear. So I don't want you to put your email in public. Oh, she did. Bless her heart. Beautiful. Very good, dear. Good. Thank you, Jack. My heart goes out to you, being left in your marriage. That's almost like a death. And at a certain point after you grieve, you'll probably also be sorting through all of this in terms of forgiving him in some way, yourself, or just letting go. Just letting go and moving on. And that really is, when I'm thinking about all this, dears, what forgiveness brings up, it's I'm typing here. Grieving, forgiveness, letting go, acceptance. Those 4 things are important to us when we experience significant harm or loss or injury. That we need to be able to move to a place where we've accepted that in whatever way, whatever manner we need to accept it so that we can move forward and not have that darkness inside us. It doesn't contribute to your growth or your life. It doesn't contribute to that of others either. So your readiness to forgive, there are 4 little statements here. I am ready to stop suppressing my frustration, to stop expressing my anger, and to release the injury. I release my thoughts of revenge and punishment. I am willing to let go of any grudges that I have held. I accept and cry away the pain that I suffered. Or, I am not ready to stop suppressing my frustration, nor to stop expressing my anger, and cannot yet release the injury. In order to be ready to forgive, I need this to happen. And so I want you to look, if you aren't ready to forgive, get very articulate and very specific and clear about what you need to happen, because I don't want you to stay in that dark place. That's not healthy, and it doesn't contribute goodness to your life. The stage 3 is offering forgiveness. You may do this and you may not. And here's a quote on forgiving, receiving forgiveness, and self-forgiveness. Research shows forgiveness lessens depression, diminishes anxiety, increases hope, improves self-esteem, decreases obsessional thinking, improves marital and family relationships. So forgiveness or letting go, or acceptance or grieving These are very healthy, and we need to be good at it when we need to accomplish that for some reason in our lives. There is a page in this guide on readiness to offer a pardon or goodwill sometimes. Sometimes you can go that far where you offer goodwill. And Michelle Wiener Davis, you may have heard of her, she's a well-known author, says, forgiveness is not a feeling, it's a decision. So, see, in this forgiveness guide, it's not about the grieving. You need to grieve. You need to let yourself have the feelings and finish the grieving. That's not forgiveness. Forgiveness is a decision. You decide that you're going to start tomorrow with a clean slate. Even if it isn't easy, you make the determination that the alternative is even harder, and that you are going to do what you must to begin creating a more positive life, and to let it go. So this page in the Forgiveness Guide is a way to help you work through, write down, caring for yourself and letting it go. I am willing to pardon you for what you did to me. I am willing to pardon you, so-and-so, for what you did not do to me. I will no longer blame you nor anyone else for this. What you did was wrong and hurtful to me in our relationship. This is not how I choose to behave in my life. In the future, what I plan to do differently is this, which will show you that, and or myself, that, this. I wish to forgive you for these things. I am now able to offer merciful restraint of myself to you. I can be generous with this. Even though I must reserve some trust for my own safety, I can offer you my moral or virtuous or honorable love. Even though you may not be able to reconcile with me, I extend my goodwill to you. And so to help you think through those things and to phrase those things for yourself. And then letting go. And I know I'm coming right down to the line, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. For a change, I can see how many viewers I have, and I'm absolutely overwhelmed and thrilled with how many of you have tuned in tonight. And I am so grateful for your participation and for your interest. The last part of forgiveness is understanding and acceptance of it all, and then looking ahead. Robert Karen says, I define forgiving as letting someone back into your heart. This returns us to a loving state, and not merely within the relationship. We feel good about ourselves and the world. Now, we can do this with a loved one, and more often than not, that's the appropriate thing. Sometimes when it's severe abuse or illegal abuse, we can't let them back into our heart, because that would be foolish. Oh, someone says, thanks, you're terrific. I enjoyed it. Thank you so much for saying that to me. I will never let that person near me. Good. Because that would be foolishness on your part. And of course, that's what happened to me many years ago too. But you can extend your empathy and compassion to the loved ones who deserve it. And if someone says something wrong or makes a mistake and apologizes, you want to be able to forgive them and then hold them close again. Oftentimes when we apologize or receive an apology and accept it and give forgiveness, that can be then an even closer and more trusting relationship than it ever was before. Usually that, though, does presuppose that the other person acknowledges and apologizes. So forgiveness can be a sweet, reverent, deep thing, especially like in family members, best friends, with spouses. When we apologize, and I had a couple do that in my office today, I asked them to apologize to each other, and my goodness, when I left my office, I caught them. They were out there hugging each other. I said, I saw that. They apologized. They have more work to do. But an apology allows the love to come back between you. Let's see here. Even though I have let go entirely, I will never let that person near me. Good. Good. Sounds very healthy, like you've been very successful, dear. Thank you. You are so wonderful to take your time away from your life for us. Oh, this is my life, dear. This is my purpose and mission and my joy. I love doing this, and Jack loves supporting me in doing this, because we now know some things that can make a better life for all of us. And it is my good joy and purpose and delight to mentor and teach and share anything that I can with you. That's why I'm here. I love my work, and I love that I get people who get it and show up and have it make a difference for them. So for tonight, this is Heather Carlisle, and thanking you for tuning into the Red Room. I will see you next week, same time, same place. Good night.